At 2:13 in the morning, Dante Moretti's mother stopped breathing in his arms. 1 second, Elena Moretti was standing barefoot in the marble kitchen of her Lake Forest estate, arguing that her son worked too much and slept too little. The next, the crystal glass slipped from her fingers. It shattered across the black and white floor, and she folded against him without a sound. Dante caught her before her head struck the stone. For the first time in 15 years, the most feared man in Chicago forgot what to do. "Ma." No response. His security team stormed into the room with weapons drawn, reacting to the crash before they understood what had happened. Dante dropped to one knee, one hand braced behind his mother's neck, the other searching for a pulse he could not find. "Call the doctor," he said. His voice was low, controlled, lethal, but his hand was shaking. "The private physician is 22 minutes out," one of his men answered. "She doesn't have 22 minutes. Dante grabbed the nearest phone and dialed 911. A woman answered on the second ring. "911, what's the address of your emergency?" Her voice was calm. Not soft, not frightened. Calm in the way locked doors were calm. Dante gave the address. "My mother collapsed. She isn't breathing." "Is she awake?" "No." "Is she breathing normally?" "I just told you she isn't breathing." "Then listen to me carefully. Put the phone on speaker and lay her flat on her back." Dante stared at the screen. No one spoke to him like that. Not police commissioners, not judges, not men who commanded armies of their own. "Sir," the woman said, sharper now, "if you want your mother alive when the ambulance arrives, do exactly what I tell you." Something in the room changed. Every armed man around Dante went still. He set the phone on the floor. "What's your name?" he asked. "My name doesn't matter right now. Put the heel of your hand in the center of her chest." Dante obeyed. "Other hand on top. Lock your elbows." He obeyed again. "Push hard and fast. I'll count with you." He began compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Keep going, don't stop." His mother's body moved beneath his hands. He hated it. He hated the helplessness. He hated the sound of his men breathing. He hated the seconds passing while the woman's voice remained steady in the center of the kitchen. "Faster," she ordered. Dante pushed harder. "That's it, stay with me." "I'm here." "Good, keep going." For 5 minutes, Dante Moretti obeyed every word of a woman he had never seen. He did not know her age. He did not know her face. He did not know that she was sitting beneath fluorescent lights in a city emergency communications center 12 miles away, one hand pressed against a headset while red call indicators blinked across 3 monitors. He knew only her voice, and when his mother suddenly gasped beneath his hands, Dante froze. "She breathed! Check again!" Another broken inhale. Dante's head dropped. Around him, armed men looked away because no one was supposed to see their boss close his eyes like that. The woman on the phone did not celebrate. "Roll her slightly onto her side if she vomits. Keep watching her breathing. Paramedics are less than 2 minutes away." Dante looked at the phone as if he could see through it. "Tell me your name." A beat of silence. Then, "Maya." "Maya what?" "Stay with your mother, Mr. Moretti." Dante's eyes narrowed. He had never told her his name. Before he could ask how she knew it, the sound of sirens cut through the gates outside. The line disconnected 38 seconds later. By sunrise, Elena Moretti was alive in a private cardiac suite overlooking Lake Michigan, and Dante had one command for his organization. "Find Maya." His consigliere, Luca Bellini, stood beside the hospital window in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. There are thousands of emergency dispatchers in the city. Not thousands who took that call. The recording is sealed. Dante turned from his mother's sleeping form, then unseal it. Luca hesitated. That alone was unusual enough to make Dante look at him. Is there a problem? No. Luca slipped his hands into his pockets. I'm wondering what you plan to do when we find her. Dante's answer came too quickly. Nothing. Luca almost smiled. Dante's eyes cooled. She saved my mother. I repay debts. Of course. Find her. Across the city, Maya Reyes finished her shift at 7 a.m. and stepped into freezing rain with no idea that a criminal empire had just begun searching for her. She was 29, exhausted, and carrying a paper cup of coffee that tasted like melted cardboard. Her dark hair was twisted into a loose knot. A faded navy coat covered the green scrubs she wore beneath her headset uniform, because the heating system in the dispatch center had been broken for 3 weeks, and no one trusted city maintenance to fix it before spring. She had taken 37 emergency calls that night, a child with an asthma attack, a warehouse accident, a domestic disturbance where she had stayed on the line with a terrified teenager until officers arrived, and one call from a mansion where a man with a cold voice had sounded more frightened than anyone else she had spoken to all week. She knew exactly who Dante Moretti was. Everyone in Chicago did. His name appeared in newspapers without convictions attached to it. Restaurants closed private rooms when he arrived. Politicians denied knowing him while attending fundraisers hosted by his companies. Rumors said he controlled shipping contracts, construction unions, nightclubs, and enough secrets to make half the city nervous. Maya had not cared about any of that when his mother stopped breathing. On the phone, he had simply been a son, a terrified one, though he would probably have shot anyone who described him that way. Maya took the train home to Pilsen, climbed 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, and found an envelope pushed beneath her door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a photograph of her leaving work 2 nights earlier. On the back, written in black ink, were 6 words. You should have let her die. Maya stared at the sentence until the hallway around her seemed to tilt. Then she heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, measured, coming up. She stepped inside, locked the deadbolt, and reached for the old baseball bat she kept beside the coat rack. The footsteps stopped directly outside her door. 3 knocks sounded. Maya gripped the bat with both hands. A man's voice came through the wood. Ms. Reyes? She said nothing. My name is Gabriel. Mr. Moretti sent me. Her stomach dropped. Of course he had found her. That was somehow almost worse. I don't know, Mr. Moretti, she called. You spoke to him last night. I speak to strangers for 12 hours at a time. It's my job. There was a pause. Then the man outside said, He asked me to give you something. I don't want it. It isn't optional. Maya's fear sharpened into anger. She opened the door 6 inches with the security chain still attached. A broad-shouldered man in a black overcoat stood in the hallway. He looked less like a messenger and more like someone who could remove a body from a room without scratching the furniture. He held a white envelope. Maya looked past him. No one else was visible. Tell your boss that normal people say thank you with flowers. Gabriel glanced down at the envelope. That was my suggestion. Despite herself, Maya almost laughed. Then she noticed the red dot trembling on his chest, a laser sight. Her breath stopped. Gabriel saw her expression and turned. The suppressed shot cracked through the hallway. He slammed into her door. Maya screamed as wood splintered beside her face. Gabriel drove the door open, threw himself over her, and pulled a pistol from beneath his coat. "Down!" Another shot punched through the wall. Maya hit the floor. The photograph fell from her hand. Gabriel saw it. His face changed. He seized his phone and called one number. When Dante answered, Gabriel said only 4 words. They found her first. Dante arrived 7 minutes later. Not the police, not an ambulance. Dante. 3 black SUVs blocked the street while rain flashed silver beneath their headlights. Men in dark coats moved through the building with the disciplined speed of a military unit. By the time Dante climbed the stairs, one sniper had escaped across the neighboring rooftops, and another man had been found unconscious in the alley with no identification. Maya sat on the floor inside her apartment, a blanket around her shoulders she did not remember accepting. Gabriel had blood on his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. Dante walked through the doorway and saw Maya for the first time. He stopped. For a man who controlled every expression, it was almost nothing. A fraction of a second, a change in his breathing. But Maya noticed. She noticed everything when she was scared. He was taller than she had imagined from his voice, dressed in a black suit without a tie beneath a long wool coat. His dark hair was wet from the rain. There was no panic in him now, no trace of the son who had counted chest compressions with her through a phone line. This man looked exactly like the rumors. Cold, expensive, dangerous. His eyes moved over her face, her hands, the splintered door, and finally the bullet hole in the wall inches above where she had been standing. Something hard entered his expression. "Were you hit?" "No." He looked at Gabriel. "Were she hit?" "No, boss." Only then did Dante breathe. Maya stood. "I assume this is the part where you tell me why someone tried to shoot me because I helped your mother breathe." Dante's gaze settled on her. "You received a threat before Gabriel arrived." She looked down at the photograph on the floor. He followed her eyes. Dante picked it up. The room became so quiet Maya could hear rain tapping the fire escape. He read the message once, then again. "Who knew you took my call?" he asked. "My supervisor, whoever can access the recordings. Maybe half the operations floor if someone talked. No one else? I don't announce confidential emergencies over breakfast." His eyes lifted to hers. "You recognized my name. You have a very searchable last name. Yet you didn't tell anyone. I was busy doing my job." Dante studied her as if that answer had unsettled him more than fear would have. Then he held the photograph out to Luca, who had entered silently behind him. "Find where this was printed. Find every camera between her building and her office. I want the shooter identified before noon." Luca took the picture. "And Ms. Reyes? She comes with us." Maya blinked. "Excuse me?" Dante did not look at her. "Her apartment is compromised. I have friends. I can stay somewhere else." "No." Now she stepped directly into his line of sight. "You don't get to answer for me." Every man in the room went still. Dante looked down at her. Maya suddenly understood how many people had probably regretted taking that tone with him. But she had spent 7 years talking people through fires, shootings, overdoses, and the worst moments of their lives. Fear could sit beside her if it wanted. It did not get to drive. "You called me because you needed help," she said. "I helped. That does not make me property." A muscle moved in Dante's jaw. "I didn't say you were." "You said I'm coming with you." Because whoever fired through your wall already knows your name, your address, your work schedule, and your connection to my family. My connection to your family lasted 11 minutes. It lasted long enough to get you shot at. Maya opened her mouth. Dante stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you walk out of this building alone, I can't guarantee you survive the block. The anger drained from her face. He hated seeing that. He would later tell himself that was the moment obligation became something else. Not affection, certainly not, but something darker than debt. The first primitive edge of possession. Maya glanced at the broken wall. How long? Until I know who wants you dead. That sounds suspiciously open-ended. It is. She almost refused just because of the way he said it. Then a bullet casing rolled out from beneath the radiator where Gabriel's shoe had disturbed it. Maya looked at it. All right, she said, but I'm not disappearing. My supervisor needs to know I'm safe. And I'm not quitting my job because your enemies are dramatic. For the first time, Dante's mouth almost curved. Dramatic. They sent a sniper before breakfast. Gabriel coughed to hide a laugh. Dante glanced at him once. Gabriel immediately became fascinated by the floor. 20 minutes later, Maya sat in the back of Dante's armored SUV while Chicago slid by behind rain-streaked glass. Dante sat opposite her, not beside her. He gave her space with the deliberate precision of a man who usually took whatever space he wanted. Maya's phone was in her hand. Her best friend Tessa had received a carefully edited explanation involving a security threat at work and a temporary hotel stay. Maya hated lying to her. Dante watched without appearing to. "Your mother?" Maya asked. "She's stable." "What did the cardiologist say?" "A rhythm problem. They're running tests." "Good." His eyes moved to her face. "You sound relieved." "Of course I'm relieved. You don't know her." "I didn't need to." Dante looked out the window. That answer followed him all the way downtown. The safe house turned out to be the top 3 floors of a luxury tower on the river. Maya stood in the private elevator staring at polished brass, veined marble, and a security panel that required both a code and a fingerprint. "This is a safe house?" she asked. Dante glanced at her. "Yes. My apartment has a chain lock and a neighbor named Mr. Alvarez who attacks suspicious people with a broom. I'm sure he's formidable. He once chased a catalytic converter thief for 6 blocks in slippers." Dante's expression did that almost smile again. Maya noticed. So did Luca. When the elevator opened, the penthouse looked less like a home than a magazine spread designed by someone allergic to clutter. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a gray Chicago skyline. A black grand piano stood near the glass. The furniture was low, pale, and probably cost more than Maya's car. 2 guards took positions outside the elevator. Dante pointed down a hallway. "Your room is the second door. Clothes will arrive within the hour." "I have clothes." "At your apartment." "I could go get them with security." "No." There's that word again. "There will be many more." Maya folded her arms. "You must be exhausting in relationships." The room went silent. Dante turned his head slowly. Luca looked at the ceiling. Maya realized she had accidentally wandered into some kind of forbidden territory. "Do you have relationships?" she asked. "No." "That tracks." This time Gabriel actually choked. Dante stared at her for a long second. Then he looked at his men. "Leave us." They disappeared so quickly, Maya wondered if they had practiced. The elevator doors shut. Now the penthouse felt much larger and much more dangerous. Dante removed his coat and laid it over a chair. "So you're not afraid enough." Maya's pulse jumped, but she held his gaze. "I'm afraid plenty." "You hide it well." "So do you." His expression changed. She continued before courage abandoned her. "Last night, you sounded terrified." Dante's eyes went flat. Most people would have retreated. Maya did not. "You asked me to tell you my name 3 times," she said. "You kept saying, 'I'm here,' even when I wasn't talking to you. You were saying it to her." His voice dropped. "Be careful." "Why? Because no one is allowed to know you love your mother? Because you think hearing me for 11 minutes means you understand me. I don't." Maya's voice softened. "But I understand what fear sounds like." For one dangerous second, neither of them moved. Dante's hand lifted as if he meant to touch a strand of hair caught against her cheek. He stopped himself before his fingers reached her. His hand closed into a fist and fell back to his side. "Rest," he said. Then he walked away. Maya watched him disappear down the hall and wondered why the moment when he almost touched her frightened her more than the sniper had. That night, she woke at 3:06 a.m. to voices beyond her bedroom door. She slipped into the hallway barefoot. Dante was in his office with Luca. The door was nearly closed. Nearly. "We traced the photograph," Luca said, "printed from a machine in one of our own logistics offices." Dante's voice was quiet. "Which office?" "South Branch." A pause. Maya moved closer. South Branch meant nothing to her. Then Luca said, "The access badge belonged to Matteo Rusk." Dante went silent. "Who is Matteo?" Maya asked from the doorway. Both men turned. Luca looked annoyed. Dante looked furious, not at her, at the fact that she had heard. "My mother's head of security," he said. Maya's skin went cold. "The man who was inside the house when she collapsed?" "Yes." "And his badge printed the threat against me?" "Yes." She swallowed. "Then maybe your mother didn't just collapse." Dante's face became absolutely still. Maya knew before either man spoke that she had just said the one thing neither of them wanted to believe. By 9 the next morning, Elena Moretti's private hospital floor had become a fortress. 2 elevators were locked down. Moretti security occupied both stairwells. Nurses passed through a temporary checkpoint, and every medication entering Elena's room was photographed, logged, and tested before it touched an IV line. Maya hated all of it, not because she thought Dante was overreacting, because she was starting to think he wasn't. She stood behind the glass wall of Elena's cardiac suite while a physician explained the toxicology results. Dante listened without moving. "There was a sedative in her bloodstream," the doctor said. "Not enough to cause cardiac arrest in most patients, but your mother has an undiagnosed conduction disorder. Combined with the medication she already takes, it could have triggered the arrhythmia." "Could have?" Dante asked. The doctor chose his words carefully. "I can't say it was intentional." "Was the sedative prescribed?" "No." Dante looked through the glass at his sleeping mother. Maya watched a door close somewhere behind his eyes. "Who had access to her food or medication?" she asked. The doctor glanced at Dante before answering her. "That's not something I would know." "I do," Dante said. His phone appeared in his hand. Within 10 minutes, 3 household employees were being interviewed, the estate kitchen had been sealed, and Matteo Rusk had vanished. That was the first real confirmation. Men who were innocent did not usually abandon their phones, empty a safe deposit box, and disappear before breakfast. Dante drove Maya back to the penthouse himself. He said nothing for most of the ride. She let him have the silence until the SUV crossed the river. "You think Matteo poisoned her?" "I think Matteo knows who did." "Is there a difference in your world?" "Yes." "What happens when you find him?" Dante turned his gaze toward her. "You don't want that answer." "Don't decide what I want." His eyes darkened. "You say that often." "You require reminders." The SUV stopped at a red light. Maya noticed Dante's right hand resting on his knee. There was a thin, pale scar across his knuckles and another at his wrist beneath the cuff of his shirt. He followed her gaze and covered the scar with his sleeve. "Do you always hide the evidence?" she asked. "Of what?" "That you're human." The light turned green. He looked away. At the penthouse, Maya learned that Dante's version of "clothes will arrive" meant a rolling rack containing enough sweaters, jeans, coats, shoes, and sleepwear to outfit a department store window. She stared at it. Absolutely not. Gabriel, whose arm was now bandaged, stood near the door. "Mr. Moretti said you needed things." "I need 3 shirts and a toothbrush." "There is a toothbrush." "Of course there is." She found Dante in his office reviewing surveillance footage with Luca. "You bought me a wardrobe." "I had someone buy it." "That distinction does not help." "You can't go home." "That doesn't mean I need 6 pairs of boots." Dante looked at Luca. "Were there 6? Luca's mouth twitched. "Apparently." Maya stared at both of them. "I'm going back to work tomorrow." "No." She pointed at him. "You see? That. We need to discuss that." "I already discussed it." "With yourself." "The shooter may know where you work." "The shooter definitely knows where I work. That picture was taken outside the building." "Then you understand my objection." "I understand it. I'm still going." Dante rose from his desk. The movement was unhurried, but it changed the temperature of the room. "Maya, my job matters. So does staying alive. To me, both matter. You can take leave. And then what? Sit in this penthouse while men with guns decide when my life is safe enough to resume?" His jaw tightened. "You think this is about control." "I think everything with you is about control." He came around the desk. "Last night someone put a bullet through the wall beside your head." "I remember." "I don't think you do." His voice was suddenly rougher. "I saw the hole, Maya. I saw where you were standing. 2 inches to the left and—" He stopped. That was the first time she saw it. Not anger. Fear. He had hidden it better this time, but not well enough. Maya's expression softened despite herself. Dante hated that too. "Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you can hear what I'm not saying." "I do that for a living." For a moment they stood less than a foot apart. Then Maya said, "Give me security. Put someone in the building. Drive me there in one of your ridiculous armored tanks. But I go back." Dante's instinct was to refuse. His second instinct was to lock every door between her and danger. The fact that he had a second instinct at all disturbed him. Finally, he said, 4 guards. 2. 4. 3, and none of them follow me into the restroom." "Agreed." Luca stared at Dante. Dante ignored him. Maya held out her hand. "What?" he asked. "We made a deal." "I know. Normal people shake on deals. I'm not normal people." "That may be the first reasonable thing you've said." He looked at her hand. Slowly, he took it. The contact lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt longer. His palm was warm. Hers was cold. Neither of them moved immediately. Then Dante released her as though the touch had become dangerous. The next night, Maya returned to the Emergency Communications Center surrounded by so much discreet security that nothing about it felt discreet. Gabriel waited in an unmarked sedan across the street. 2 Moretti men occupied a coffee shop in the lobby. Another pretended to read a newspaper in the employee entrance despite being approximately the least convincing newspaper reader Maya had ever seen. Her supervisor, Denise, pulled her aside before shift. "You want to tell me why 3 men who look like they eat handguns for protein are downstairs?" "Long story." "Does the long story involve the Moretti call?" Maya froze. Denise lowered her voice. Internal Affairs asked for the recording this morning." "Why?" "They didn't say." "Who requested it?" "That's the weird part. The paperwork came through the mayor's public safety liaison." Maya felt a warning bell go off inside her. "Did you release it?" "I had to." "Who besides you has listened to it?" Denise frowned. "Maya, what is going on?" Before Maya could answer, every monitor in the room blinked. Once. Twice. Then the call system went black. 40 dispatchers looked up at the same time. The emergency backup system kicked in 30 seconds later. In those 30 seconds, someone entered the restricted server room using Denise's credentials. They copied exactly 1 file. Dante Moretti's 911 call. The breach was discovered at 11:32 p.m. At 11:36, Gabriel called Dante. At 11:41, Dante walked onto the operations floor with 2 city officials trailing behind him and 30 armed security officers being held downstairs by increasingly nervous police. Maya removed her headset. "You cannot be in here." Dante kept walking. "I can now." She looked behind him at the deputy commissioner. The deputy commissioner looked at the floor. Maya understood. Money, power, fear, favors. Whatever key Dante used, doors opened. He stopped at her desk. "Get your coat." "I have 4 hours left." "Someone breached a city emergency system to steal a recording of your voice. The recording has your voice too. They already know mine." That silenced her. Dante bent closer, speaking only for her. "Whoever did this is not interested in the call because my mother stopped breathing. They're interested in something that happened during it." Maya's memory replayed those frantic 11 minutes. Instructions, compressions, sirens. Then something else. A sound behind Dante. A voice. She closed her eyes. "What?" he asked. "Play the recording." "Not here." "Now, Dante." It was the first time she had used his first name. He noticed. So did she. 5 minutes later, they were in a secure conference room with Denise, Luca, and the deputy commissioner. The audio began. Maya listened to her own calm voice guide Dante through CPR. She heard his breathing, the slap of shoes across marble, men speaking in the background. Then at timestamp 04:17, barely audible beneath Maya counting compressions, a man said something from across the kitchen. Luca amplified it. The words came through in a whisper of static. "She wasn't supposed to wake up." Everyone in the room went still. Dante's face changed first. He recognized the voice. "Matteo." The recording continued. Another man replied, too faint to identify. Then Matteo said, "Call Viscari. Tell him we need another way." Dante stopped the audio. Maya looked at him. "Viscari," Luca answered this time. "Salvatore Viscari, head of a rival family." "So your mother was targeted as part of a mafia war." Dante's silence told her it was worse. "What aren't you telling me?" He looked at the deputy commissioner. "Leave." The man left immediately. Denise hesitated. Maya nodded to her. "I'm okay." When the door shut, Dante said, "My mother owns 31% of Moretti Holdings." "That sounds legal." "It is." And relevant how? If she dies, her shares transfer to me unless I die first. Maya stared at him. Luca continued quietly. If both Dante and Elena die within 30 days of each other, a trust provision transfers voting control to the next eligible family trustee. Who? Dante looked at Luca. Luca's expression had gone grim. My uncle, Dante said, Carlo Moretti. Maya understood the shape of it. Your rival doesn't just have someone inside your organization. No. You have family trying to take your empire. Yes. And the recording proves at least part of it. Yes. Maya leaned back in her chair, which means they didn't try to kill me because I saved your mother. Dante's eyes met hers. They tried to kill you because you heard them fail. The first time Dante put his hand on the back of Maya's neck, it was not romantic. It was because glass exploded behind her. They were leaving the communications center through an underground parking garage when a black sedan accelerated between concrete pillars. Gabriel shouted. Dante saw the rear window lower. He moved before the gun appeared. One arm wrapped around Maya's waist. His other hand drove her head down against his chest as bullets shattered the windshield of the SUV beside them. Dante turned his body over hers. Stay down. Gunfire cracked through the garage. Maya felt his heartbeat under her cheek, violent and fast despite the eerie calm in his voice. His men returned fire. The sedan fishtailed around a column and disappeared up the exit ramp. Only when the echo died did Dante lift his head. His palm was still pressed against the back of Maya's neck. You hit? No. He looked over every inch of her anyway. Maya noticed blood on his collar. You are. It's glass. Dante. I'm fine. She reached up. He caught her wrist before her fingers touched the cut near his jaw. Their eyes locked. His grip was firm but careful. For a second, neither spoke. Then Dante released her slowly. Behind them, Gabriel said, We need to move. Dante's attention snapped back to the garage. He opened the rear door himself and put Maya inside. This time he sat beside her, not across from her. His hand remained near hers on the seat for the entire drive. He never touched her. He never moved it away either. The penthouse was no longer considered secure. By midnight, Dante had moved Maya to an estate 30 miles north of the city, hidden behind frozen woods and a gate guarded by men with rifles. It was older than the penthouse, built from gray stone with tall windows, dark wood, and fireplaces burning in nearly every room. This is where you grew up? Maya asked when she noticed a childhood photograph on a library shelf. Dante took it down and turned it face down. Partly. You were cute. I was 6. You looked less homicidal. I was planning ahead. She laughed before she could stop herself. The sound startled him. Dante had heard Maya angry, frightened, exhausted, sarcastic. He had heard her voice save his mother's life before he ever knew her face. He had not heard her laugh. Something in him shifted with terrifying ease. Maya noticed the way he was looking at her and stopped. What? Nothing. That is definitely not a nothing face. You have categories for my face now? I've been kidnapped into luxury. I need hobbies. You are not kidnapped. Can I leave? No. She raised her eyebrows. Dante exhaled through his nose. Temporarily protected against your judgment. That's kidnapping with better branding. He should have been irritated. Instead, he found himself wanting to hear her laugh again. That frightened him more than the ambush. At 1 a.m., Maya found Elena Moretti awake in one of the estate's upstairs bedrooms. The older woman had been moved from the hospital under a false name after Dante learned the attack on the parking garage had likely been coordinated through someone monitoring official channels. Elena was pale but alert, with silver threaded through dark hair and the same watchful eyes as her son. "So," she said when Maya entered, "you're the voice." Maya smiled. "Apparently." Elena held out her hand. Maya took it. "My son has told me almost nothing about you." "That sounds like him. But he moved half his army because someone shot at you." Maya glanced toward the open doorway. Dante stood there. "Of course he did. Elena saw him too." "Go away, Dante." "No, I'm speaking to the woman who saved my life." "I know." "Then stop looming." Maya bit the inside of her cheek. Dante gave his mother a look that had probably terrified grown men. Elena pointed toward the hall. "Out." For the second time Maya had witnessed, Dante Moretti obeyed a woman. He walked away. Elena smiled faintly. "He hates when I do that in front of people." I gathered. Then Elena's expression changed. "Did he tell you about your father?" Maya went still. "My father?" Elena's fingers tightened around hers. "Oh." The single syllable carried regret. "No," Maya said. "He did not." Dante reappeared in the doorway. Too late. Maya looked at him. "What about my father?" Elena closed her eyes. Dante's face became unreadable. "Maya." "No, don't Maya me. What about him?" Her father, Rafael Reyes, had died when she was 13. A car accident on a wet interstate. That was what she had been told. That was what the police report said. Dante entered the room and closed the door behind him. "Your father worked for mine." Maya stared at him. "No. He was an accountant. He owned a hardware store. That came later." Her voice thinned. "What did he do for your father?" "He kept records." "What kind of records?" Dante did not answer quickly enough. Maya stepped back from Elena's bed. "What kind, Dante?" "Financial records, payments, political accounts, offshore transfers." The room seemed to shrink. "My father worked for the Mafia. For my family." "That is not better." Elena whispered. "He tried to leave." Maya turned to her. Elena's eyes filled with an old grief. "Rafael discovered that Carlo was stealing from the family and selling information to Vescari's father. He brought the proof to my husband." "What happened?" Dante answered. "Carlo found out." Maya looked at him. The silence told her the rest. "No." "Maya?" "No." She backed away until she hit the dresser. "My father died in an accident." Dante's voice was low. The brakes were cut. Maya stared at him as if he had struck her. "You knew?" "I learned the truth 5 years ago. And you never told me." "I didn't know you." "You found me in hours after one phone call. I didn't know where you were before that." "That's not what I asked." Dante went quiet. Maya understood. "You knew his daughter existed." "Yes." "And once you found me, you still didn't tell me." "I was trying to keep you alive." "By controlling the truth?" "By not handing you a reason to go looking for Carlo while he was already trying to kill you." "You don't get to decide when I deserve to know how my father died." Her voice broke on the last word. Dante's face changed. He took one step toward her. Maya stepped back. He stopped immediately. That hurt more than if she had shouted. "Get me out of here," she said. "No." Her eyes flashed. "Do not do this now. Carlo is hunting you. I don't care." "I do." The words landed hard. Maya stared at him. Dante seemed almost angry that he had said them. "I care whether you live," he corrected, colder. That is not negotiable. Maya laughed once without humor. There you are. She walked past him. He did not stop her. For the next 2 days, Maya barely spoke to him. And Dante discovered that silence from one woman could make an entire mansion unbearable. He held meetings, he interrogated lieutenants, he traced Mateo's movements through shell companies and burner phones. He slept 2 hours in 48. None of it distracted him from the fact that Maya no longer looked at him unless she had to. On the 3rd night, he found her in the library with her father's old file open on the table. He had ordered it brought from storage. She was crying silently. Dante stopped in the doorway. He knew how to threaten men into confession. He knew how to break alliances, buy judges, shut down ports, and make people disappear from cities without leaving paperwork. He did not know what to do with a crying woman who hated him, so he did the only thing that felt honest. He sat on the floor beside her chair, not touching, not speaking. Maya looked down at him. The great Dante Moretti sits on floors? Apparently. Is this manipulation? Probably badly executed if you have to ask. A tear slipped down her cheek. His hand moved, stopped. Then, very slowly, he offered her a folded handkerchief. Maya took it. My father was scared, she whispered. The last month before he died, he checked the locks 3 times every night. I thought he was becoming paranoid. Dante said nothing. I was angry at him because he wouldn't let me go to a school dance. You were 13. I told him I hated him. Dante looked at the floor. He knew you didn't. You don't know that. Yes, I do. How? Because my mother has told me she hated me at least twice this week. A broken laugh escaped Maya. Dante looked up. There it was again. That sound, only this time it hurt. Maya wiped her face. Why did you really find me? To repay a debt. At first. He did not answer. Why did you keep me close after you knew the attack was about the recording? Security. Dante. His eyes met hers. The fire cracked in the silence. Finally, he said, because every time I could not see you, I imagined the bullet hitting 2 inches to the left. Maya stopped breathing for a second. He continued, voice controlled with visible effort. I have had men follow you since the morning after the first attack. I know when you drink coffee. I know you forget to eat during night shifts. I know you call your friend Tessa every Sunday. I know you stand near exits in crowded rooms because emergencies taught you to count doors. Maya stared at him. That is deeply unsettling. I know. You're admitting to surveillance. Yes. Why? Because lying to you has cost me enough. She looked at him for a long time. Are you obsessed with me? Dante's expression went still. The obvious answer frightened him. So he gave her the dangerous one. I am becoming something I don't know how to control. Maya's pulse jumped. He stood before either of them could move closer. Then every light in the mansion went out. The emergency generators failed 3 seconds later. That was when Dante knew the attack had come from inside. Down, he said. Maya heard the change in his voice and obeyed without argument. Some commands did not need negotiation. Dante drew a pistol from beneath his jacket and moved in front of her as footsteps thundered somewhere beyond the library. A window shattered downstairs. Then another. Gunfire erupted through the west wing. The estate, which had felt like a fortress 10 minutes earlier, became a dark maze filled with muzzle flashes and shouted orders. Dante grabbed Maya's hand. Stay behind me. What about Elena? Gabriel has her. How do you know? Because if he doesn't, I'll kill him myself. That is not reassuring. He pulled her through a concealed door behind a bookcase. A narrow stone passage sloped downward beneath the house. Maya stared. You have secret tunnels? My grandfather had trust issues. I'm starting to think that's genetic. Even now, in darkness with armed men invading the estate, she could still say something that almost made him smile. Then a shot struck the wall inches from Dante's shoulder. He spun, fired once, and shoved Maya behind the stone corner. A body fell somewhere in the darkness. Maya flinched at the sound. Dante looked at her immediately. Don't look back. She didn't. They reached the underground garage, where Gabriel was waiting beside an armored SUV with Elena wrapped in a coat. Luca stood beside him. For half a second, Dante relaxed. Then Maya saw Luca raise his gun, not toward the tunnel, toward Dante. Dante! He turned as the shot fired. Maya slammed into him. The bullet tore through his upper arm instead of his chest. Dante hit the concrete, dragging Maya down with him. Gabriel fired at Luca, but Luca was already behind the SUV. More gunmen flooded the garage from the opposite entrance. Elena screamed her son's name. Dante's men returned fire. Maya pressed both hands against the blood spreading through Dante's sleeve. He stared past her, not at the wound but at Luca, his closest advisor, the man who had stood beside him for 12 years, the man who had helped search for Matteo, the man who had known every safe house they moved to. You, Dante said. Luca stepped from behind the vehicle once the firing stopped. Half the security detail had turned their weapons toward Dante. The betrayal was complete. Luca looked almost apologetic. Carlo promised stability. Dante laughed once, cold and disbelieving. Carlo promised you my chair. He promised an end to a war you refused to finish. You poisoned my mother. No, Matteo did. Poorly. Elena's face went white. Luca looked at Maya. And then she ruined everything with 11 minutes on a phone. Dante moved before anyone expected it. He pulled Maya behind a concrete pillar as Gabriel kicked open the SUV door and dragged Elena inside. Bullets tore across the garage. Dante fired with his left hand, his injured arm hanging uselessly at his side. "Get in the car!" he shouted at Maya. She saw an opening. She also saw Luca circling behind him. No. Maya! Luca raised his weapon. Maya grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted beside the pillar and swung it with both hands. The metal cylinder slammed into Luca's wrist. His gun clattered across the floor. He turned on her, furious. Dante hit him before he could take one step. The fight was short and brutal. When Luca went down, Dante stood over him with a gun pressed against his chest. Luca smiled through blood on his lip. "You won't shoot me in front of her." Dante's eyes were empty. Maya knew he would. She put a hand on his uninjured arm. "Dante." He did not look away from Luca. "She betrayed you," Luca said to Maya. "You think he saved you? He brought you into this. If he had left you alone after the call, no one would have known you mattered." Dante's finger tightened on the trigger. Maya felt it through his arm. "Dante." This time he looked at her, not because she was stronger than him, not because she could stop him, because it was her voice. The same voice that had cut through his panic at 2:13 in the morning. The same voice that had told him where to put his hands, when to push, when not to stop. "Don't," she said. Luca laughed softly. There it is. The great Dante Moretti taking orders. Dante stared at Maya. Then he lowered the gun. "Gabriel," he said. Gabriel understood. He cuffed Luca and dragged him toward the second vehicle. Maya looked at Dante's bleeding arm. "You need a hospital." "So do you." "I'm not shot." "You threw yourself in front of a bullet." "It missed." "Because it hit me." "You're welcome." His expression almost broke. Then the far garage door exploded inward. A black SUV crashed through the smoke. Carlo Moretti stepped out behind 6 armed men. Dante's uncle looked nothing like him except around the eyes. He was older, silver-haired, immaculate in a dark overcoat, as if arriving for dinner instead of a coup. "Elena," Carlo called, "this has gone far enough." From inside the armored SUV, Elena opened the door. Dante swore, "Ma, stay inside." She ignored him. Carlo's face softened when he saw his sister-in-law. "You were never meant to suffer. You tried to kill me." "I tried to prevent Dante from destroying what his father built." Elena looked at the armed men around him. "And this is preservation?" Carlo's gaze shifted to Maya. "Give me the dispatcher and Luca. I leave. Elena keeps her shares." "No more blood tonight." Dante stepped in front of Maya. "No." Carlo sighed. "You would risk your mother for a woman you met 3 days ago?" Dante did not hesitate. "I would burn every building I own before I handed her to you." Maya looked at him. There was no romance in the words. There was something more dangerous. Certainty. Carlo raised his pistol. The next seconds became noise. Gabriel fired first. Elena ducked behind the SUV. Dante shoved Maya behind the engine block and returned fire. Maya crawled toward Elena as glass rained across the concrete. Then Carlo appeared on the other side of the vehicle, his weapon pointed directly at Maya. Dante saw him from 15 feet away. "Maya!" Carlo fired. Dante crossed the space between them as if his body had decided before his mind could. He hit Maya hard enough to knock her behind the SUV. The bullet struck him beneath the ribs. He staggered. Maya screamed his name. Dante still managed to fire once. Carlo fell. Then Dante dropped to one knee. Maya reached him before he hit the ground. Blood spread beneath his hand. "No," she said. His face had gone gray. "Maya, don't talk. You always tell me to talk. Not now." She pressed both hands over the wound. Around them, the gunfire faded as Gabriel's remaining men secured the garage. Dante looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. No control, no distance, only fear, not of dying, of leaving her. "You were right," he whispered. "About what?" "I'm exhausted in relationships." A sound escaped her somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Dante, stay awake." His eyes started to close. She slapped his cheek lightly. "Look at me." He did. "Good. Stay with me." The words stopped him. They both heard the echo of that first call. Dante managed the faintest smile. "I'm here." "Keep being here." Sirens screamed beyond the gates. This time, Maya held Dante's life beneath her hands while strangers ran toward them, and this time he obeyed her until help arrived. Dante woke 2 days later in a private hospital room with Maya asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her hand was wrapped around his. He stared at it for a long time. Then Elena spoke from the window. "If you wake her, I'll unplug something expensive." Dante looked at his mother. "You're threatening a patient." "I'm your mother. It's different." He glanced back at Maya. "She stayed?" Elena smiled. "She threatened 3 nurses, 1 surgeon, Gabriel, and me." Dante's mouth curved faintly. "That sounds like her." Maya opened her eyes. She saw him awake and stood so fast the chair nearly fell over. "You idiot." Dante blinked. "Good morning." "You got shot because you jumped in front of me." "Yes." You are never doing that again." "No." She stared at him. He added, "I mean no, I cannot promise that." Maya looked ready to strangle him with the heart monitor cable. Elena quietly left the room. Dante watched Maya pace once, then stop beside the bed. "Luca?" he asked. "In custody. Federal custody, apparently. Gabriel gave them everything from the recording to Carlo's financial files. Matteo was arrested near Milwaukee." "Carlo? Dead." Dante closed his eyes briefly. Not grief exactly, the ending of something old. When he opened them, Maya was still there. "You should go home," he said. Her expression changed. He forced himself to continue. "The threat is over. Your apartment is being repaired. Security will stay nearby until the federal case is finished, but you don't have to see me again." Maya stared at him. "That's what you want?" "No." The honesty surprised both of them. Dante looked down at their hands. "What I want has stopped being reasonable." "What do you want?" He was silent for a long time. Then the man who had commanded rooms full of killers, politicians, and millionaires answered with more difficulty than he had ever given an order. "I want to know you're safe when I wake up." Maya's eyes softened. "I want your coffee in my kitchen even though it smells terrible. I want you arguing with me about guards. I want to hear you laugh in rooms that have been quiet too long." He looked at her now. "And I want to be the man you call when you're afraid, even though I know I'm also a man you have reasons to fear." Maya's throat tightened. "That's not a small problem." "I know. You don't get to control me." "I know. You don't get to hide things because you think you're protecting me." "I know. You are going to hate how many boundaries I have." "I already hate several." She almost smiled. Dante lifted her hand to his lips, but stopped before touching it. He waited for permission. Maya noticed that most of all. She moved her hand the last inch herself. His lips brushed her knuckles. It was the gentlest thing she had ever seen him do. 3 months later, Maya was back at work. She refused the private driver. She accepted one security officer, mostly because Gabriel had somehow become impossible to get rid of, and because Mr. Alvarez approved of him after the two men spent an afternoon repairing Maya's door. Elena recovered and began attending cardiac rehabilitation with the same enthusiasm she had for obeying her son, which was none. Luca and Matteo became cooperating witnesses in a federal racketeering case that dismantled what remained of Carlo's faction and exposed several Vescari operations. Dante's empire changed too, not overnight. Men like Dante did not become saints because they fell in love. He was still feared, still dangerous, still capable of making a room go silent by walking into it, but he sold off 2 businesses Maya refused to ask about, cut ties with men she never wanted to meet, and began moving more of the Moretti fortune into legitimate companies. When she accused him of doing it for her, he denied it. When Elena accused him of doing it for Maya, he left dinner early. Everyone knew anyway. The first snow of winter fell on a Thursday night. Maya finished her shift at 11:47 p.m. and stepped outside the communications center. A black SUV waited at the curb. Dante stood beside it in a dark coat, snow collecting in his hair. Maya stopped beneath the awning. "You know stalking is still illegal even when you own the car." "I was invited." "By whom?" "Your mother." "My mother has been dead for 16 years. "Then perhaps Elena." Maya laughed and walked toward him. He held out a paper cup. She took it suspiciously. "Coffee?" "Hot chocolate. Your coffee is offensive. You've grown. Don't tell anyone." They stood in the snow while traffic moved through the wet city behind them. Dante reached into his coat and handed her a small velvet box. Maya looked at it, then at him. "If that is a ring, I'm getting back in the elevator." "It isn't." She opened it. Inside was an old silver emergency service medal mounted beneath glass. The engraving read, "Stay with me." Maya's smile disappeared. Her eyes filled. Dante looked suddenly uncertain, which remained one of her favorite things to witness because so few people alive ever saw it. "The city gives dispatch commendations every year," he said. "Apparently there are forms." "You filled out a form?" "I had people." "Of course you did. But they wouldn't let me write what I wanted on theirs. So you made your own medal?" "I know a jeweler." "You know everyone." "Not everyone." His gaze settled on her. "I didn't know you." Maya closed the box. "Not when you called." "No." "You only knew my voice." It was enough. Snow caught on his lashes. The city moved around them, loud and bright and indifferent. Maya remembered the man on the phone at 2:13 in the morning, kneeling on a marble floor beside his dying mother, terrified and pretending not to be. She remembered ordering him to push harder. She remembered telling him not to stop. And she remembered that he had listened. Not because she was powerful, not because he feared her, because for 11 minutes he trusted a stranger with the person he loved most in the world. Now he trusted her with something even harder. Himself. Dante lifted one hand toward her face. As he had done the first day in the penthouse, he stopped before touching her. Maya smiled. "You can." His fingertips brushed her cheek. The dangerous man everyone in Chicago feared looked at her as if permission were the most precious thing anyone had ever given him. Then he kissed her beneath the falling snow. Not like a mafia boss claiming something that belonged to him. Like a man who finally understood that love was not possession. It was trust. Across the street, Gabriel politely looked away. Maya pulled back just enough to whisper, "You know I'm still working Sunday." Dante sighed against her forehead. "I know. And no extra guards. 3, 1, 2. She smiled. "We'll discuss it." Dante opened the SUV door for her. Maya climbed inside, still holding the medal. Before joining her, he looked once at the glowing windows of the emergency center above them. Months earlier, a woman in that building had been nothing but a voice in the dark, a stranger ordering him to keep his mother alive. He had spent his entire life believing obedience was weakness, trust was leverage, and love was the easiest way to lose everything. Then Elena stopped breathing. A woman he had never seen told him what to do, and Dante Moretti obeyed. It saved his mother's life. In the end, it saved his too.